Oh, I'm okay. I know it's not exactly Halloween, but it is year-round here at Shea Cameron. In actuality, the only thing that really makes this video Halloween-themed at all is that the series of events we'll be discussing coincidentally took place around Halloween, and the story's contents are quite scary. It all came from a company-wide memorandum that leaked in 1998 from Microsoft, detailing alleged plans to take down an entire sector of computer software. Free software. They worried that with the rapid advancement of computers, freeware would soon become just as capable and sophisticated as the software that they were selling, which could effectively eliminate their hold within the market. This primarily focused on one of the most popular forms of freeware, operating systems that were distributed with Linux. Though these documents did not just focus on free software, a much bigger component of it, arguably what made this movement towards a free digital world so intimidating, was the rise of something called open source software. They even discussed the strategies that Microsoft could use to not only manipulate their audiences into being afraid of using these free programs, but to even slow down their development altogether through litigation. The Halloween documents, as they would soon be called, were made public by Linux developer Eric Raymond after they were sent to him by an undisclosed party. Annotated versions of these memos were then posted on his website, and his findings were then published by the New York Times. Given that this was already in the middle of another antitrust controversy that Microsoft was in, the story garnered national attention. Microsoft themselves eventually had to come forward and confirm that these documents were in fact genuine. And so, the war on free software officially began. Today, we will be looking at the details of these Halloween documents, what made free software so intimidating for Microsoft, and the kind of role free software has within the computing world today. Now, Microsoft's growing popularity in the 90s coincided with a growing sense of indignation, an attitude that was almost counterculture in spirit. These sentiments were amplified with the news of Microsoft's antitrust lawsuit. I've talked about this case in detail a few times on my channel, but the long and short is that Microsoft felt intimidated by their competition. No, we are not talking about Apple. They were actually doing quite badly at the time. Instead, another company was in Microsoft's rearview mirror. During the start of the internet's commercial rise, Netscape was pretty much the industry standard web browser, holding majority market share for many years, and Microsoft wanted a piece of the pie. Their answer to this was releasing their own browser called Internet Explorer and making it free. You had to pay for Netscape, so this gave customers more incentive to switch over and save some money. Then they did another brilliant strategy. Punished computer manufacturers who shipped PCs with Netscape pre-installed on them. If they did not include a version of Windows that had Internet Explorer already on it, they would be in violation of their license to use it. Many parties felt that this gave Microsoft an unfair advantage against competing web browsers and violated free market protections. So, the issue was taken to court, and the whole thing became a very public spectacle. Microsoft was seen by many people as a monopoly, which created a lot of resentment towards them. Bill Gates even had a pie thrown in his face. Despite the whole thing tarnishing their reputation, Microsoft would ultimately end up winning this whole case. Maybe not in the courts, but definitely within the market. By the early 2000s, Netscape became history, and Internet Explorer was now the dominating web browser. Microsoft was able to gain footing by taking a commercially sold product and making it free. Internet Explorer was freeware. But you know what else is free? Linux. Since its invention in the early 1990s, Linux quickly started gathering some attention from many tech enthusiasts, all because of one decision that its creator made. Linus Torvalds declared that Linux be a free, open source kernel for any operating system to distribute. Now, why is this a big deal? As you know, computer software is made up of code. That's how it is able to operate. Each program's code is unique and has special things that make it up, much like a work of art. This work can then be copyrighted and its contents closed off from the public, only granted to those who license it. closed source software. This is what Microsoft does with Windows. It's kind of like Coca-Cola's recipe famously being a trade secret that is locked away in a vault. Open source is like a soda company saying, hey, here's the recipe. You can access it for free, create your own version of it, and sell it. You can do whatever the heck you want with it. It is public domain software. That's what Linux is. And the best part is that because it's free and open source, tens of thousands of talented programmers around the world have made their own improvements and unique contributions to it. This has allowed it to pretty much become one of the most flexible, robust, and stable kernels out there. And even back in the 90s, Microsoft was getting intimidated. 2 Halloween documents were initially leaked, and those are the ones we will be covering today, as they really highlight just how thought out this whole approach was. Because this is a spooky video, it's time for a spooky story. My apartment is haunted. It was built about 100 years ago. Every Tuesday morning, I wake up to a loud pounding noise on my door, and I hear a very angry voice on the other side. They just start pounding, bam, bam, bam. Where's my rent? Bam, bam, bam. Where's my effing rent? Bam. No wonder why this place is free. No one wants to live here. It's scary. I wrote about the whole thing in my blog. My Squarespace blog. Squarespace is an all-in-one web design platform that allows you to make the cyber world of your needs. For business owners and hobbyists alike, there is a web page with your name on it. Squarespace's cutting-edge design tools provide award-winning website templates that are curated based on your preferences, profession, and even personality. And you can always go in and make changes if you so desire. And Squarespace's payment portal will let you sell your own products and services to your most loyal visitors, even those who live internationally. And you can start your free trial today at squarespace.com and then head to squarespace.com/nationsquid to get 10% off a website or domain name. Bam, bam, bam. Where's my website? Bam. Be sure to check it out. Be sure to check it out. Document number 1 is a much broader look at this situation. It primarily covers open source software as a concept rather than focusing on a specific program. It talks about how the best way to tackle the power of open source software is to do it institutionally rather than focusing on individual companies. There is certainly no evidence to suggest that their reason for this approach was because of how targeting Netscape worked out for them, but it is interesting to see the timeline of these documents and draw a bit of a parallel. One prominent method to combating open source software that's laid out in this document is to go after what makes them special, basically finding the Achilles heel. As we've discussed, the very nature of open source software can allow it to become very well designed, thanks to constant community contributions. Because the source is open to everyone, that also includes Microsoft. What if Microsoft's world-famous engineers could take a look at this code and find ways to make it better and then close it off? This would allow for Microsoft products to utilize protocols that are just as, if not more capable than the open source ones, as they are basically just extensions of them. They are building on top of a protocol that already existed, but this time, it's better, and they can actually sell it. Microsoft now has an advantage because they created something that's better, and no one knows for certain how they did it. They created a recipe for Coke. One of the many protocols listed in this document is HTTP DAV. That's a mouthful. Also known as WebDAV, it is an extension of the HTTP protocol that allows for users to remotely access and manage files over the web as if they were on their very own computer. WebDAV, of course, is an open standard, and popular cloud services like Nextcloud use the WebDAV protocol and are also open source programs. Microsoft took this protocol and integrated it into their products, such as Microsoft Exchange Server, and added numerous features that are rooted deep into and specifically tailored for an already popular program. So now users have an improved version of what they were already using. And because what Microsoft did is a trade secret, it can't exactly be replicated in the same way. So now the free version of the protocol seems less remarkable and less useful. Therefore, people are now more willing to actually spend money on it. This is actually a big reason why Microsoft Office is still much more popular than LibreOffice, despite the latter being free. It can perform the most basic data processing tasks pretty much identically to Office, but it doesn't have the same kind of support, compatibility, or even unique features that are tailored to the Microsoft ecosystem, which a lot of people and companies find convenient to use. Therefore, it does often make paying a premium worth it. It is so incredibly convoluted and shows how much Microsoft thought this whole thing through. As contentious as these decisions are, Microsoft technically is allowed to do them. This is public, open source material that they are adding their own spin to and then selling. It is fair game. Until it isn't. Which leads us to document number 2, the one which focuses on Linux. This is a much more panic-stricken document, as much of it lists out all the things that makes Linux better than the Windows NT kernel. For one, it mentions that it is a best-of-breed Unix system. Unix is the kernel that macOS uses, by the way. They also note that because of its open source nature, Linux has a long-term credibility which exceeds many other competitive OSs, and that includes Windows. They even mention that Linux can be as much as 30 or even 40% faster at rendering HTML graphics than Windows can. With these things considered, Microsoft highlights that Linux is quickly becoming the natural choice for a lot of server owners. The document is awfully honest, and I feel like a lot of it is just Microsoft conceding that they have been backed into a corner. The only thing they can really rely on is making improved proprietary versions of open source material, like we just discussed. You might be thinking, if this can easily be done with things like protocols, why doesn't Windows just switch their whole operating system over to the Linux kernel? That way they can reap the benefits of both Microsoft compatibility and a robust foundational system. Well, as you can imagine, it just isn't that easy. Windows is built on a kernel that Microsoft has invested years of care and resources into, the NT kernel. Switching to a new kernel, even if it's something powerful like Linux, would require Microsoft to rebuild Windows from the ground up. That would be incredibly expensive and time-consuming, and fixing all the possible compatibility issues that may arise from that is not something that could happen overnight. It is much less work and money to make changes to things like protocols. This may seem like a sunk cost fallacy, especially in the 90s, but Microsoft essentially had every reason to stick with Windows NT. Switching over, even back then, wouldn't have made commercial sense. So, as listed in this document, to combat Linux, Microsoft was planning an arguably much more sinister approach: social engineering. They were following a tactic that is very common among businesses. It's even mentioned multiple times in this document. It's an acronym: FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. As a fictional Madison Avenue executive once said, if you don't like what they are saying, change the conversation. That's what Microsoft did with Linux. They would basically take the disadvantages of Linux and just harp on them, draw a lot of attention to them so that they become the first things that come to mind when the average person hears the word Linux. Because no one technically owns Linux on account of it being open source, you could then rephrase that as saying, Linux doesn't have a clear owner overseeing its security. Because Linux makes up so many different operating systems, you could rephrase that as, Linux is just all over the place. It doesn't have a sense of identity. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There is one quote from this memo that is particularly unnerving, because it's only mentioned once and not further elaborated on ever again. The effects of patents and copyright in combating Linux remains to be investigated. This seems to suggest that Microsoft may have felt so threatened by Linux's rising popularity that they intended to resort to taking Linux distributors to court, and therefore slow down its production. This is very difficult to do, as they would basically need to find as many loopholes within the law as possible to even scrape together a viable case against Linux. Screwing this up could mean vexatious litigation, which they could be sanctioned for. With all things considered, and given that Microsoft already had a very loud lawsuit going on at this time, that may be why this isn't mentioned any further. But of course, that's just speculation on my part. Given the time that this all occurred, it's no surprise that the Halloween documents created so much noise. While Microsoft executives did confirm that the memo was genuine, they said it was merely an engineering study and did not reflect the company's beliefs. You could say that the results of the Windows-Linux war are inconclusive. When it comes to the server market, Linux won. they hold majority OS market share. When it comes to the everyday consumer PC market, Windows has a hefty lead. You could say that in the 90s, Microsoft had a pretty myopic take on the kind of roles Linux and Windows would have with computers over the next 30 years. The reason Windows is still in the lead, despite costing money, is because it's easier to use and has been around longer. People are more familiar with Windows, and that's because it's much older, and therefore Microsoft had a head start in exposing their OS to PC manufacturers. This exposure then allowed for Windows to support much more software, and Microsoft has also spent decades trying to make it more user-friendly. Because there are so many Linux operating systems, software support and user-friendliness is much more sporadic. As a full-time video editor and graphic designer, the specific software that I need just isn't available on Linux. Therefore, I have no use for it. It makes more sense for me to use Windows or Mac. People who work with computer servers, however, might find Linux more useful because they can handle the more complex environment and can therefore really take advantage of its robustness and flexibility. My friend, who's a computer engineer, only uses Linux, and the server he set up for me only uses Linux as well. Lastly, Windows has an additional advantage over Linux. Their biggest worry in the 90s was figuring out how to compete with free software. Well, Windows is basically free now. Many schools and employers provide Windows free of charge, and anyone who already owns Windows 10 can upgrade to Windows 11 for free if their computer is compatible. Now that these versions of Windows can be hosted and downloaded off the internet instead of only having to be installed through physical media, it is much easier to do this business model than it was when the Halloween documents were released. I want to be clear that everything I mentioned about the Halloween documents in this video is alleged, but I do think that the entire story provides interesting insight on where people thought computers were headed back in the 90s. For many people, the ordeal just reinforced their already negative convictions for Microsoft, while others saw it as an opportunity for Linux to make the next chess move. Perhaps it's not too late. I believe that the best way Linux can truly prevail is if one of its many operating systems can get prominent enough to become easy to use and develop the same level of software support that Windows and Mac have. Until then, Windows has the advantage, and Linux will be primarily left to the pros. But it only takes you to create the change that you want to see in the world. If you'd like to learn more interesting and mysterious Microsoft products, I did one on the tale of Microsoft Coffee, which you can check out here. A special thanks to all my Patreon supporters, patreon.com/nationsquid. Buying me a coffee is always very appreciated as well. Thank you for watching, everyone.